All right, so we're diving into organizational transformation today.
Sounds exciting.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at freedom to flourish, or F2F,
Okay.
and comparing that to the Teal model,
Right.
which a lot of people are probably already familiar with.
I'm familiar with, at least heard of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're kind of taking a leader's perspective on this.
Yeah.
So if you are a leader in an organization and you're interested in these models,
Right.
and you're looking for a way to make your organization not just successful,
Yes.
but really thriving,
Yeah. Thriving.
then this deep dive is for you.
That's right.
So we've got a whole stack of really interesting research that we're going to be pulling from.
Yeah.
Some of it is kind of comparing F2F and Teal directly.
Right.
Some of it's taking kind of a deep dive into each model.
Yeah.
We've even got like a script from a presentation on F2F.
Oh, wow.
That was given in Amsterdam.
Okay.
So that should be pretty interesting.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. So I think our mission today is to really distill the key insights from all of this research
Yeah.
and highlight what's unique about each model
Yeah.
and how F2F kind of builds on the foundation that Teal has laid.
I think one of the really interesting things is both models aim for the same future.
Okay.
You know, organizations operating in a more purpose-driven, fulfilling way.
Right, yeah.
But the paths they take to get there are surprisingly different.
Interesting.
So yeah, understanding those differences is key, especially for leaders.
Okay, so let's maybe start with like a little Teal refresher.
Okay.
Most people probably know Teal from Frederic Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations,
Yes.
where he talks about companies evolving through these different stages.
Yeah.
Red, amber, orange, green, and then finally reaching this self-managing Teal stage.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Teal's core principles, according to Laloux, are evolutionary purpose, wholeness, and self-management.
Yes.
So the idea is that organizations, like living organisms, they naturally evolve through these stages,
Yeah.
with Teal kind of being the pinnacle of that evolution.
Mm-hmm.
But as with any kind of popular model,
Sure.
Teal has also attracted some critiques.
Yeah. Some pretty strong critiques.
It has,
Yeah.
right? So what are some of those?
Well, some people argue that Teal is a little too optimistic, maybe a bit too simplistic, particularly in how it views power dynamics.
Okay.
So even in self-managed structures, there can still be these hidden hierarchies and
Right.
power plays that maybe need to be addressed. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, assuming just because there's no CEO,
Right.
suddenly everyone has equal influence, and we know that that's not always the case in reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's also the argument that Teal relies maybe a little too heavily
Mm-hmm.
on a specific psychological framework
Yes.
called spiral dynamics.
Right, which suggests that human consciousness evolves
Yeah.
in these neat color-coded stages, mirroring the evolution of organizations.
Right.
So,
But spiral dynamics, I mean, it's an interesting model.
yes,
I think it offers some intriguing insights.
it does.
But some critics question whether it's really a universal model
Right.
for human development
Mm-hmm.
and, by extension, organizational evolution.
Exactly.
They argue that, societal development is far more complex
Yes, far more complex and nuanced.
than a simple color-coded spiral can really capture.
Yeah, it's not quite as simple as that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And, we should also mention the ethical aspect.
Yes, definitely.
Some argue that Teal, while emphasizing purpose and wholeness,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really offer a concrete ethical framework
That's a really important point.
for decision-making,
Yes.
especially when it comes to a company's responsibility towards society as a whole.
Right. Teal can sometimes feel a bit idealistic in that sense. You can't just say, hey, bring your whole self to work
Right.
and expect that to magically solve ethical dilemmas,
Yep.
you know? There needs to be a more grounded understanding of what constitutes ethical behavior
Mhm.
for both individuals and organizations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've got a sense of Teal
Okay.
and some of these concerns that people have raised around it,
Yes.
let's dive into how F2F differs,
All right.
particularly in its philosophical foundation.
Okay.
So this is where we see one of the first major departures, right?
Yeah.
Teal, as we discussed, is rooted in this idea of organizations as evolving organisms,
Yes.
guided by this internal evolutionary purpose.
Mm-hmm.
F2F takes a different approach,
Right.
drawing from something called critical realism.
Critical realism. Okay.
Yeah, and I have to admit, that sounds a bit intimidating to me.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Of course, yeah. I mean, in simple terms,
Okay, cool.
critical realism acknowledges that there's a reality out there
Okay.
that exists beyond our individual perceptions and interpretations. It's kind of saying, hey, there's a real world out there with real structures and mechanisms that shape how things work.
Okay.
And that includes organizations, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about changing mindsets,
Okay.
but also about recognizing these actual systems and power dynamics at play.
So it's less about kind of, I don't know, waiting for some mystical evolution of consciousness.
Right.
And more about understanding the real world factors
Yeah.
that are driving organizational change.
Exactly. And for leaders who are trying to drive real change, that's a really important distinction.
Okay.
Because F2F is about actively shaping those structures, the practices, even the values of your organization,
Okay.
aligning them with a clear and robust ethical framework.
So it's much more pragmatic and action-oriented
Yes, very much so.
than just kind of hoping that everyone will magically reach
Right.
a higher level of consciousness.
Exactly. It acknowledges you can't just wish away power dynamics or pretend that everyone has equal influence. You have to address those realities head on.
Okay.
And that leads us to another key difference, which is how each model uses that color-coded system to map organizational evolution.
Yeah, because they both have these stages, right?
They do.
Red, amber, orange.
Yes.
But they don't represent the same things in each model.
They don't, and that's really important to remember.
Okay.
So F2F grounds its color progression in liberal political theory,
Okay.
particularly drawing from the work of Philip Pettit on republicanism.
Interesting.
So each color represents a distinct stage of development,
Okay.
reflecting specific values and principles that resonate with real-world political ideologies.
Okay.
So, for instance, red in F2F represents a more traditional hierarchical structure, aligning with kind of conservative political thought,
Okay.
whereas yellow embodies a more neoliberal, market-driven logic,
Interesting.
similar to what we see in many agile companies today.
Okay. So by connecting its color scheme to real-world political ideologies, F2F makes it easier to understand the different mindsets.
Yeah, and power dynamics.
And power dynamics at play within organizations.
Yeah, exactly.
And it also highlights something that I think Teal tends to gloss over.
Which is
this inherently political dimension of organizational transformation.
Yeah, shifting power dynamics and challenging existing norms, which is often at the heart of organizational change, is a political process.
Right.
So we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what about the transition to the final stage?
Okay.
Because that's another area where F2F seems to diverge from Teal, right?
Yes, it does.
Particularly when it comes to the orange stage.
You're exactly right.
So Teal jumps directly from green.
Right, which focuses on community and stakeholders straight to Teal.
Yeah.
F2F, however, places orange as this crucial stepping stone towards its final purple stage.
Interesting. So what does orange represent in F2F?
So in F2F, orange is all about establishing a solid foundation of justice, fairness, and democratic governance.
Sure.
It's about creating a system where everyone has a voice and can participate in decision-making, ensuring that power is distributed in a just and equitable way.
So it's like laying the groundwork for genuine self-management to flourish.
Yeah, you could say it's a prerequisite
Yeah.
for that kind of self-management.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like saying, before we can have true self-management,
Yeah.
we need to ensure that everyone has the basic freedoms and rights
Absolutely.
necessary to participate fully and responsibly.
Yes, and this links back to that critique of Teal potentially overlooking power dynamics.
Right.
F2F is arguing that before you can even talk about self-management, you need to create a system that prevents domination.
Okay.
Where no one individual or group can exert arbitrary power over others.
So it's not just about getting rid of bosses.
No.
It's about establishing a framework that safeguards individual freedom.
Yes.
And ensures that power is distributed in a way that's fair and just.
Precisely.
And that's where this idea of orange as a stepping stone becomes so crucial.
It is. It's about establishing that solid foundation of freedom and justice.
Yeah.
Ensuring that self-management doesn't just become a new form of disguised hierarchy.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
It is, yeah.
It seems like F2F is adding this layer of nuance and real-world practicality to the Teal vision, recognizing that true transformation requires more than just good intentions.
Yeah, it does.
And it brings us to this very intriguing idea that's central to F2F,
right.
which is this concept that genuine freedom is actually the foundation for ethical behavior.
Interesting.
Now, that sounds a bit counterintuitive to me.
It does, right.
Because wouldn't more freedom potentially lead to more chaos?
Yeah.
Even more unethical behavior?
Well, not according to F2F. The argument is that only when individuals have that genuine freedom to choose can they make truly ethical decisions.
Okay.
Because if you're constantly being controlled or coerced,
Right.
your actions aren't really a reflection of your own moral compass.
Right.
You're simply following orders or trying to avoid punishment.
So it's about creating an environment where people are empowered
Yes.
to make their own choices.
Yes.
Knowing that they'll be held accountable for the consequences.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like saying, we trust you to do the right thing, and we're giving you the freedom to do so.
And that idea of freedom being a prerequisite for ethical behavior is really at the heart of how F2F approaches organizational development.
Okay.
Which, as you might guess, is quite different from how Teal approaches it.
Okay, so let's dive into that.
All right.
How does F2F's vision of development differ from Teal's?
Okay.
Particularly when it comes to building something that they call organizational character.
So Teal, with its roots in spiral dynamics, tends to focus on inner development, aligning individuals with this perceived evolutionary purpose.
Right.
And, some might find this a bit esoteric or abstract.
Yeah.
But
so how does F2F approach development differently?
So F2F thinks about organizational character as something that you actively shape.
Okay.
It's about making those conscious choices about the values you want to embody, the behaviors you want to encourage, the decision-making processes that you put in place.
So if Teal is about being,
yeah,
F2F is more about doing.
That's a good way to put it.
It's about translating those lofty ideals
yeah.
into concrete actions and systems.
Yeah, aligning your organization's day-to-day operations with its stated moral ambition.
Okay.
And remember that three-step process we talked about?
Yes.
Reveal, reflect, and re-inspire?
Right.
That's really the roadmap for developing this organizational character.
Right. So reveal is that honest self-assessment, acknowledging both the strengths and the weaknesses of the organization.
The shadow sides.
Yeah, the shadow sides. Yeah. And then reflect is digging deeper into your values, asking those tough questions about purpose and impact.
Right.
But it's re-inspire where the rubber meets the road.
Yes.
That's where you translate those reflections into action.
It is.
So it's about aligning your policies, your processes, your structures, everything with those values that you've identified.
And for leaders, this means moving beyond the inspirational speeches.
Okay.
Actually creating systems that support ethical behavior and decision-making.
Right. It's about walking the talk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly.
It's about ensuring that your everyday actions and decisions reflect the values that you've identified and the future that you're trying to create.
You got it.
Okay, so it makes me think about how these two models view leadership itself.
Yes.
I imagine there's some differences there too.
Absolutely.
So how does Teal view leadership?
Well, both models. It's important to note.
Okay.
See, leadership as a role, not a position.
Okay.
But Teal, with its emphasis on self-management, often talks about leadership as being very decentralized and situational.
Right.
Kind of like a flock of birds, where different birds take the lead at different times, depending on what's needed at that moment.
So anyone can be a leader depending on the context and their expertise.
Right, creating that more fluid and agile organization where leadership emerges organically.
Okay, so what about F2F? How does it approach leadership?
So F2F, while acknowledging the value of that distributed leadership, also emphasizes the need for intentional leadership development, particularly when it comes to cultivating certain virtues and skills.
So it's not just about anyone stepping up.
Yeah.
It's about developing leaders who embody certain ethical qualities and have the wisdom to navigate complex situations responsibly.
Exactly. Moving beyond simply managing to truly leading with purpose and integrity.
Okay, so I'm sensing that a lot of this comes down to how each model defines good when it comes to organizational behavior.
Yes.
So, what makes an organization good in the eyes of Teal versus F2F?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, Teal tends to associate good with achieving that higher level of consciousness, that evolutionary purpose we talked about. Organizations are seen as evolving towards a more purpose-driven, holistic way of operating.
Okay, so aligning with that natural evolutionary trajectory.
Exactly, but what about F2F?
Yeah, how does F2F define good?
So F2F anchors its definition of good in two key principles.
Okay.
Human dignity and the common good.
Okay.
And these are principles that are rooted in both liberal political thought and virtue ethics.
Okay.
So it provides a really solid framework for evaluating organizational behavior.
Okay, let's unpack those a little bit.
Okay.
What does F2F mean by human dignity?
So human dignity in this context is about recognizing the inherent worth and potential of every individual within the organization, treating everyone with respect, fairness, compassion.
Right.
Regardless of their role or position.
So creating a work environment where everyone feels valued, respected, as a human being, not just a cog in the machine.
Exactly. And this actually links back to F2F's emphasis on freedom.
Okay.
When individuals feel respected and valued, they're more likely to act responsibly and make ethical choices.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about the common good?
Okay, so the common good...
How do they define that?
It's about recognizing that organizations don't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
They operate within a wider community and have a responsibility to consider the impact of their actions on that community.
Yeah.
So it's about making decisions that benefit not just the organization itself, but also the stakeholders it interacts with.
The stakeholders?
Employees, customers, suppliers.
Right.
The wider society.
So it's about recognizing that businesses have a responsibility to society to contribute to a flourishing society, not just their own bottom line.
And this is where we see a key distinction between Teal and F2F.
Okay.
Teal, with its focus on evolutionary purpose, might leave the definition of good a bit more open to interpretation.
Okay.
Whereas F2F anchors its understanding of good in these very concrete principles.
Right. Human dignity.
Of human dignity.
And common good.
And the common good.
Okay. So it's about ensuring that the purpose is not just about the organization itself, but also about contributing to a just and flourishing society.
Right. Recognizing that businesses operate within this complex web of social and ecological relationships. And their actions have consequences that go far beyond their own internal operations.
Yeah.
It's about aligning the organization's purpose with a vision of a better world.
Not just a better organization.
Not just a better organization, exactly.
Okay, that's interesting. This is giving me a lot to think about.
Good.
I'm starting to see how F2F builds on this foundation of Teal. It's offering this more nuanced and practically applicable framework for leaders who are really trying to transform their organizations in a way that prioritizes both individual and social good.
It's like F2F takes that inspirational vision of Teal and translates it into this tangible roadmap for change. One that's rooted in a really solid ethical framework and focused on building that organizational character we talked about earlier. It's about moving beyond just good intentions and creating a system that actually supports ethical and sustainable behavior.
Right. This highlights another key difference, I think, between Teal and F2F.
Yeah.
So Teal, with its emphasis on emergence, might be more comfortable with a certain level of ambiguity and fluidity in decision-making.
Right.
Whereas F2F, with its roots in liberal political theory, emphasizes the importance of those clear processes and structures.
Yeah, even in a self-managed environment.
For ethical and responsible decision-making.
Exactly. It's about creating a system that supports ethical behavior, not just assuming that good intentions will always lead to good outcomes.
Right. So this is making me think about how these two models approach this. Like, very practical challenge of performance management.
Yes. How do you measure and reward performance?
Yeah. How do you do that in a way that aligns with these principles of freedom, dignity, and the common good?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it really reveals a lot about the underlying values and assumptions of each model.
Okay.
So let's start with Teal. Since Teal organizations are moving away from traditional hierarchies, embracing self-management, they often adopt a more organic and decentralized approach to performance management as well.
So instead of like top-down performance reviews, you might see more like peer feedback
Yeah.
self-evaluations,
Exactly.
and a more holistic view of what constitutes good performance.
Right. So they often ditch those dreaded annual performance reviews
Right.
in favor of more frequent feedback loops,
Okay.
peer-to-peer evaluation,
Okay.
and a focus on personal growth and development.
Which I think a lot of people would welcome.
Yeah, I think so too.
But how do you ensure accountability?
Right. That's the question.
How do you make sure everyone's pulling their weight if there isn't that formal system of rewards and punishments?
Well, Teal relies very heavily on this idea of shared purpose
Okay.
and intrinsic motivation.
Mm-hmm.
So the belief is that if people are aligned with the organization's purpose
Okay.
and feel valued for their contributions, they will naturally be motivated to perform at their best.
It's a pretty optimistic view
It is.
of human nature.
It is, and it requires a certain level of organizational maturity.
Right.
A strong commitment to those Teal principles.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So what about F2F?
Okay.
How does it approach this?
So F2F, while also valuing autonomy and self-management,
Right.
takes a more structured approach,
Okay.
recognizing the need for both clear expectations and accountability mechanisms.
Okay, so it's not just about trusting that people will do the right thing.
Right.
It's about actually providing a framework
Yeah.
that supports ethical behavior and ensures that the organization is achieving its goals.
Yes. F2F emphasizes the importance of aligning those performance management practices
Okay.
with the organization's ethical framework
Right.
and its commitment to the common good.
So it's about making sure that performance is measured, not just in terms of, individual team output,
Right.
but also in terms of the organization's impact.
On society.
On society?
On the environment.
On the environment, yeah.
Yeah.
So, they might incorporate social and environmental impact metrics
Absolutely.
into their performance management systems.
Yeah, rewarding behaviors that contribute to the common good.
Right.
Holding individuals and teams accountable for their impact
Right.
on the wider community.
Okay, this is giving me a much clearer understanding of how these two models, Teal and F2F, translate into real-world action.
Yeah, it's not just abstract principles.
It's about how we structure our organizations, how we motivate people, how we measure success.
Precisely, and I think the choices we make in those areas really reveal a lot about our underlying values and assumptions.
Right, and ultimately both Teal and F2F offer compelling pathways for creating organizations that are not only successful,
Yes,
but ethical and sustainable.
I agree.
So this has been incredibly insightful,
Yeah.
but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
We have. Yeah.
There's so much more to explore when it comes to the practical applications of F2F.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm really excited to learn more
Me too.
about how organizations are putting these principles into action.
Yeah.
Creating these really transformative workplaces that are making a positive impact on the world.
That's what it's all about.
We've spent the last two parts really digging into freedom to flourish,
Yes.
F2F.
Yes.
And how it provides that roadmap for creating organizations that are not just successful,
Right.
but also deeply ethical and purpose-driven.
Yeah.
It seems to offer this really cool blend of inspiration and practicality
It does.
that I think a lot of leaders are looking for.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well,
And what I find so compelling about it
Yeah.
is that it's not about imposing this rigid set of rules.
Okay.
It's more like offering a menu of options.
Okay.
And encouraging organizations to kind of pick and choose the practices that really resonate with their unique contexts and values.
So it's about providing a framework, not a formula.
Exactly. Yeah.
So giving leaders the tools and the guidance to create something that's truly tailored to their specific needs.
Yeah. Empowering leaders to become like architects of their own organizational transformation rather than just following a prepackaged recipe.
Right.
Yeah.
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 That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
But even with that flexibility, are there any core practices that seem to consistently emerge in F2F organizations?
There are definitely some recurring themes,
Yeah.
and one that stands out is this emphasis on what F2F calls constitutional governance.
Okay, constitutional governance.
Yeah.
Now, that might sound a bit intimidating to some people.
Yeah, maybe a bit bureaucratic.
Yeah.
But
What does that actually mean in a practical sense?
think of it as creating a set of guiding principles, a kind of organizational constitution
Right.
that outlines the core values and decision-making processes that everyone agrees to uphold.
So it's like establishing that shared understanding
Exactly.
of what the organization stands for, what it's ultimately trying to achieve in the world.
And this might include, like, a clearly defined purpose statement that goes beyond just profit.
Right.
Explicitly articulates the organization's commitment to the common good.
Okay.
It could involve a set of ethical guidelines.
Okay, like a code of conduct.
Yeah, like a code of conduct that everyone's expected to adhere to no matter what their position is.
Right.
And it often includes establishing clear mechanisms for resolving conflicts, making decisions in a way that's fair, transparent, and accountable.
So it sounds like it's about embedding these principles into the very DNA of the organization.
That's a good way to put it.
So making them a living, breathing part of the culture.
It's not just words on a wall. It's about how we actually operate on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and this ties back to that idea of freedom as non-domination.
Exactly.
Yeah. Ensuring that no single individual or group has the power to, dictate or control how things are done.
Right. It creates that framework for distributing power in a way that's just and equitable.
Okay.
Ensuring that everyone's voice is heard and decisions are made with that collective good in mind.
Okay, so this all makes perfect sense to me.
Good.
But, creating the structures and the systems is only part of the equation, right?
Right.
You also need the right people in place
Absolutely.
to make those systems work.
You need the right people with the right mindsets.
Yeah, and that brings us back to this idea of practical wisdom.
Yes.
That F2F emphasizes so strongly.
Yeah, the structures and the processes are really important, but they're only as effective as the people who are leading and operating within them.
Right.
And that's why F2F places such a strong emphasis on developing practical wisdom in leaders at all levels of the organization.
So practical wisdom.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it sounds a bit like something out of an ancient philosophy textbook.
It does, yeah.
How would you define it in the context of modern leadership?
Well, it's about combining moral judgment with the ability to navigate complex situations effectively.
Okay.
So having the discernment to know what the right thing to do is, even when there's no easy answer.
Why?
Even when you're facing those competing priorities.
Yeah, those gray areas.
The gray areas, those conflicting values.
Yeah.
So it's not just about being intelligent or experienced.
Yeah.
It's about having that deeper understanding of what's truly good and right. And then having the courage and the skills to actually act on that understanding.
Right. Even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard.
Damn.
And F2F argues that this kind of practical wisdom is absolutely essential for leaders who are trying to create these organizations that are not just successful, but also ethical and sustainable.
Makes you wonder, though, can you teach that?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Is it something that people are born with?
Yeah.
Or is it something that can be developed?
I think F2F would say that while some people might have a natural predisposition, it's definitely something that can be cultivated, developed through intentional practice and reflection.
So it's about providing the right kind of training and development opportunities, but also creating a culture where people are encouraged to reflect.
Yeah, to think critically.
Learn from their mistakes.
Yeah, to learn and grow.
Strive to become more ethical and effective leaders.
Absolutely. Creating that space for ongoing learning and growth, both at the individual and organizational level.
That makes sense. So for those leaders out there who are listening and maybe feeling inspired by what they're hearing, what's the next step?
Well, there are some fantastic resources available. One of the best places to start is the website of the Global Leadership Society, the organization behind F2F. They have articles, case studies, even a toolkit specifically designed to guide organizations through this process of implementing those F2F practices.
That's great.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a real community of practice forming.
There is.
Around this, bringing together leaders from all different industries and backgrounds.
Yeah, who are all committed to creating a more just and flourishing world.
That's fantastic.
It is.
So this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive.
Yeah.
We explored the philosophy behind F2F.
We did.
We unpacked those key principles.
Yeah.
And we even got a glimpse of how it's being put into practice by real-world organizations.
And we saw how F2F takes the inspiration of Teal, translates it into this more nuanced, practically applicable framework, addresses some of those critiques, provides a clear roadmap for leaders who are serious about creating these organizations that are not just successful, but also ethical and sustainable.
Yeah. And I think what's most important is that we've seen how F2F isn't just about changing like systems and structures.
No,
Yeah,
it's about changing the way we think,
exactly.
about work,
Right.
and how it contributes to a better world.
It's about transforming the way we think about work and its potential to contribute to a better world.
Yeah, reclaiming that sense of purpose and meaning in our work.
Yeah.
Creating organizations that truly embody those values of freedom, dignity, wisdom.
Absolutely. So for all the leaders out there who are listening and maybe feeling inspired,
Yeah.
explore F2F further.
Yes.
See how you can bring these principles to life in your own organization.
Yeah, take that next step.
Because ultimately, it's about more than just creating successful companies.
Right.
It's about creating a world where work is a source of fulfillment, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole.
That's a vision worth striving for.